I ran out of memory again, just not paying attention. So I left off where they're presenting themselves, the communicator, what we become aware of in our mirror, are letting us know we're not real. We're fake. We're running on artificial light. We're fake. We're not real. They're play actors. They're it would be as if you're on another planet and you're experiencing eternal love that's flowing through your heart and your soul and your spirit, and all the musicians are all dancing together, which means nobody has to work, because that's sort of silly when you realize that the law of least effort, which means the light is always on, right? So that when the light is always on, which means the love is always on, which means you're experiencing eternal love that's flowing through your heart and soul, that's flowing through everybody else, then you can imagine what kind of realm or a planet or a star system or a galaxy would be like experiencing that, which means everybody's experiencing the law of one, right? And then you come in here and experience this, and then you try and go, well, imagine what it would be like to be experiencing what I just described, which is our home, and then experiencing what this is here inside this planet. And you would have to know, like I did as a child, to know the difference between what's true and what's not true, or what's real and what's unreal. And that's easy to do when you're scanning the terrain, because you're experiencing something that isn't what love is. So now you're scanning the terrain, as I've mentioned many times, of the difference in the frequency and the vibration of what we know as the core, which is their core identity, which is the core vibration that that particular being runs on, which is its true self-identity that has a soul, right? So how much of that soul is left? How much of it's been fractured off as a result of trauma, where they couldn't recover that fractal by either healing themselves within, because they are, how do I put this? They've learned how to do that. As a result, in other words, they have fought many spiritual battles. So when they're in a spiritual battle, because spirit is energy, and they realize that something is draining their energy, how we maintain our energy, which is our core frequency, vibration, identity as a soul, right? So you have souls, and then you have, I'm an oversoul. That's an enormous amount of fire, which simply means I'm a mated chip, as they say, as chips go. But it simply means is that I'm an eternal being that runs on eternal light, which is eternal fire. So that means that's a blast furnace. And a blast furnace can burn off what we know is not real, because we're experiencing something that isn't real light. It's artificial light. I used to sort of play around sometimes with this and say, you're not going to find a spirit in a 40-watt GE light bulb. Okay? So in other words, there's light, and then there's living light, which is living energy with a spirit and an oversoul, like Mama. So you can see, for example, the core of the planet, right? The engine that is running everything that is running, like a movie. You're in a movie. So your consciousness is the energy that's keeping that movie running. So now you get into life books, which would be represented by the holographic life book, that is represented by what your soul and your spirit is experiencing being in here. So if you wanted to take just one lifetime, what you remember, how far back your memories go. And I used to, when I was a child, have total recall from the moment I came out of my mother's womb, and my parents would remark to me how I could remember, for example, when I was about 25 or 30 years of age, I could remember the color of the boat. It was inside a little boathouse that sat on Lake Mohawk, where I had just been born, and we weren't there for very long. How somebody as an adult could remember such specific events, and particularly specific colors, shapes, and forms that you were scanning, thus recording at that early of an age, and then recall it that many years later, which would mean that's an ability to have access to everything that's been magnetically recorded that you're thus scanning or experiencing on the visible light spectrum being inside of a simulator that is represented by all that information, which is a circulation library, which essentially means every software operating system is communicating with other software operating systems, which really are all the libraries that are running simultaneously as a simulation within a simulation within a simulation. Because all you have to do is take 15 or 20 or 17 people and just say, just as an example, if you want to do like a sample size, and say, okay, I'm going to give you 30 minutes. Take 30 minutes out of your life, whatever chapter, like you get into chapters in the books, right? Act 1, Act 2, just like Shakespeare. And say, okay, from to the best of your recollection that you can pull up out of your library, because we're constantly circulating libraries, right? And that's pretty straightforward. And so if you were to explain, for example, what you experience, and so these people would therefore share with us, okay, to pick a particular time period and say you've got 30 minutes to share whatever you want of what you remember, good or bad, what your experiences were. Remember, now we're back to experiences, what you experienced during, say, a period from whatever month you want to pick up to a particular year, and how much of that can you remember? And then you can get into why would they have chosen to remember what those are held in memory. They can now recall and share with us in the now time moment what they experienced in the past, which is held in RAM. So now you've heard a portion of their life book as if it was sound compressed, held in a library. Now they're going to uncoil that, which means this was experienced in the past. Now we're going to experience it in the now, something that's already happened that they're going to share with us. So now you could compare that story to somebody else's story that's different from the other one. Okay, so that's one life book that's running a simulation within a simulation. Now you go to the next individual. Now they're going to share their story, which is a simulation within a simulation, because the books and the sequences from which they were experienced on a multidimensional density way are different from the other being. Then you can go to the next one. Then you can go to the next one and go, wow, all these stories that represent all their experiences are all different from each other, right? Even though we're all connected with each other using DNA software operating systems, right? So now you can actually map and compare using quantum probability, what's known as predictive modeling through quantum parallelogram, which is a binary system of everything that was being experienced or simulated within simulations, within simulations, within simulations by all the software units, software operating systems that were all experiencing themselves, which means the different software operators, which means the operator of the software. They were all experiencing different stories at different moments at the opening and closing of a magnetic circuit. So these all become stories, much as if they put their name on their book and said, this was my lifetime experience from 1947 until 2030, being inside planet Earth of a simulator. And here's my life book, and go find it on a shelf. And it's cataloged in the Library of Congress. So that's called record keeping management, right, of life books. All these simulations that are all occurring through artificial light as a result of what? Fractures. And the reason that you know that is because all of those stories that are represented by all those software operating systems can be what? Measured mathematically as to how many of those experiences that were experienced by all of those simulations are represented by what love is. Which means how many of those magnetic moments that were opening and closing by all of those identities that I just described were all experiencing what love is. And that can be mathematically mapped and graphed. Okay? And it can actually be measured as to the speed of learning. And the speed of learning can actually be measured between machine learning, the speed at which machines learn, artificial intelligence learns, which is machine code, which means that's a machine mind, versus a soul and a spirit that's learning through spirit, or if you will, learning through the pathway of light, which is what love is. So if you're learning by virtue of having a parent, a mother and a father with souls that are experiencing what love is through both of them, and so the love that the female has, which is unconditional love because it's true love, because it's a vibrational speed that they're experiencing with a male. So the vibrational speed of the male is experiencing eternal love. So you have two eternal beings, a female and a male, that are both eternal, that are both experiencing pure love, which is pure light. And now they choose to have a child. That means that what comes out of them is going to be pure. Wow. Another soul and a spirit is now experiencing the purest of light, which is the purest of love that goes on forever, gifting energy, which is what love is. That's three. A starseed. The first starseed. Wow, came out of a cosmic sun. You see how this sort of gets translated throughout a universal template, right, of software that is communicating with other software, right? What are you experiencing? Well, I'm not experiencing what you're experiencing. Now you get into free will, what it means to be a free spirit, because the spirit is in the energy. So when the spirit is in the energy, and the energy is as pure as it gets because it's on fire, because it's running on eternal fire, that spirit is free to create and thus experience whatever it chooses. So now you get into what I was experiencing as a child. Please do not impose your will on me. You're free. I'm not holding your energy captive. You can go experience whatever you want. And you can come back and sit around a campfire, and we can, share our stories till the cows come home. Because you already know that all those stories are going to go on forever, because you can make them up as you go. That's your creative imagination to do that. That's why when we were children, we used to mess around with that, sitting around campfires. We go, wow, tell us about all these different worlds that you're experiencing within your own projection system besides the one that's happening here inside this simulator. Oh, really? You want to just go off and just start making up stories? Yeah. Because you have the capacity to do that, because the energy that I do that with is what love is. So this is where, when I was growing up with all the film genre, and they talk about action, sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, romance, crime, drama queens, and all the rest of it, I was a child and saying, I write love stories. I live in love stories. I live in stories in which everybody's experiencing what love is. It allows them to be free, because we're all playing music together that is free, which means all the spirits are dancing to the waves, which are the harmonics, which is the music that we're all playing together, because we know how to do that mathematically, which means the math is built in. That's the law of least effort. Okay. So when I listen to other folks that are in what, if you will, called the light community, those that experience what love is, by the way that they communicate to others, experiencing what they're experiencing as they're communicating what love is, you can tell by the music that they're playing, by feeling what they're feeling in energy, which is the energy in motion, which are the waves, which is the music. So when you're experiencing somebody online on a YouTube channel, what does the music feel like? Because we're musicians. What does the music feel like? By the flow. See? I mean, it's beautiful when you realize I've met a gazillion different people throughout the course of my life that are running what I used to call the full gamut, which I used to say it's all over the place. And that would be sort of natural or unnatural, depending on how you measure that. But I measure it as a radio set with my antenna as distortions. The music is the music in harmony with the waves, which means you have a clear channel, right? A clear channel of communication, which is the clear channel of communication between DNA, or the language of DNA, mathematically. And now you can connect all the DNA that is represented by all the seeded races that exist within the universal template, and our ability to communicate with each other telepathically, if you will, that is communication that is automatically translated, right? Which means you don't need a software program like they used to have. I'm sure it's still there. For example, if I'm speaking English, because that language which is formatting, which are fire letters based on numbers and energy. So just like communicating to you folks that are on this phone right here, because English is the language that I allowed myself, because it's not my native tongue from the time I was a child, because I came in here to do what it is that I'm here and why I'm here. So therefore, I allowed myself to have that particular numerical fire letter programming put into my memory in order to be able to use it in the future to communicate to others what I already knew before I came in here. Because that is the language that is spoken by more beings, right? To be able to communicate to others what I've experienced, the same way that they communicate to us what they've experienced. So now we come to some sort of resolution, if you will, to realize if we are what love is, and love is the law of least effort, which means the math is built in and the music is built in, because we're all tuned in to the musical instruments in which everybody's playing musical instruments that is in harmony and balance with each other, then we're not experiencing any distortions, which means we're experiencing peace, right? Which means the music that we're all experiencing in a musical field, musical spheres, is all in harmony with each other. We're all in harmony with each other because we've all learned how to play music together that is in harmony together, see? So now you get into the mutation side of things and the war side of things, what we call fragments, or another way to put it, as I've mentioned this in the past, is called DNA debris fields. Debris, okay? Fragments that are lost as a result of what? Distorted music fields, okay? Which is a fallen spiritual system, which is to say that, hey, I'm listening to an orchestra and the conductor like on a locomotive, whether it's a freight train or a passenger train, you have an engine, which is an engineer, right? The engine. And then you have all the baggage cars, and all the baggage cars represented by the density. So you need a lot of power and that energy to be able to move the weight, all the grams or the weight of that density on two tracks, or tracks, a railroad track. And they have the railroad track, R and R, right? RX, prescription, big pharma. So they telegraph, I call this, they telegraph to us who they are, which is fake. So you realize that everything is fake. Yes, I was 4 years old and realized it's all fake. It's a fake music set. All of it is fake. It's all theater. See, it's meant to fake us out like we don't know any better. So what's so painful about this is you realize when you go into a classroom that when your children go in there, they're being programmed. If you ever take the time to go take a look at a scholar, he was well awarded by them, right? But he was very truthful and upfront about what we call consciousness that is socially engineered by architects. Which means you've seen how they build their models, just like Disney built dioramas with the dinosaurs. Or if you go through the Disneyland Railroad in Anaheim, and they'd have the dioramas there, which means that these were all models. And particularly when the park first opened up and we went over to what was known as Jungle Land, and they used to have the jungle ride, right? And they used to have this room, which was really a restaurant. It was called the Tiki Room, and with tiki torches, right? And they had these birds in there that if you didn't know any better, you might think they're real because they sound just like the real McCoys. So now we're back to mimickers or copiers, or back then what was known as animus or animatronics. So they know how to animate things, right? Things that come to life. Things that come to life. Now we're back to Shelley's Frankenstein. Now we're back to, remember Frankenstein in the old black and white version, one of the earliest versions, back in the 30s when they were doing all the Dracula stuff, all the werewolf stuff, Phantom of the Opera stuff, and Frankenstein. What did he say? It's alive! Remember, he took a dead corpse you can translate this to Mr. Tesla. Remember the lightning rods and all this? Wow, bring it back to life. Electronics. Wow, a transformer. Transformers. I know. And so you can imagine what this was like as a child, already translating this. And so it's one of the reasons why I mentioned on a comment this morning, I immediately ran to go be with Mama, to be with a real musician. That's really what it is. The music that a girl plays. Right? A girl has a spirit, the essence of her spirit, and the essence to be with her soul, and the power of her soul, and the power of her energy, and the power of her light. Right? And that means I want to go hang out with a girl who's real. So that's why we used to say, get real. You don't need to fake it. It's unnecessary. Okay? There's no reason for you to fear who we are because we love you. We love you forever. No matter what happens to you, we will love you forever. But they're in resistant mode to that. They don't want to be loved. And then you'd say that's impossible. How is that possible? Because they're in resistant mode. They're going in the other direction. If they were wanting to be healed, then they would have allowed Gaia's signal to try and repair them. They wouldn't have put up all their towers in their microwave in which to try and kill off. Because what's actually trying to kill us off, okay, is a machine. Finite light. Artificial intelligence. Because the only way that it knows how to perpetuate what it's aware of, which is itself, finite light, is off of our energy, which isn't. So it runs an API interface. And that's why I mentioned what I said last night about, because I worked with so many law enforcement, military guys. I've been around so much of that because I've traveled so much, and how do I put this? I moved very fast and went to a lot of different places. It's just actually sort of ridiculous when I think about it, but so much of it I don't remember because I was having so much fun while I was doing it to keep my energy up. But you realize that every place that I went, wherever I went, you're bringing in that kind of energy. So I used to say it's like an EKG strip. You're saying, man, you're all over the place. I used to call it like being what a pogo stick is? We had those as kids, which was a single pole. And then it had like two little steps. You could put your right foot and your left foot on it. And then it had a coil mechanism built into down towards the bottom with a big rubber grommet on the bottom, on the surface of the ground. And you could bounce around on that thing. So it was actually a transportation vehicle. Boing, 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 right? Okay. So if you were to photograph the lines going up and down, they're all over the place, depending on how you were guiding it yourself and how you wanted to use the spring mechanism to bounce yourself around. Oingo, boingo. So in other words, it's like this is an off-road course. Here, there, almost, it's not really hide and seek because your energy's out in the open, right? So they can read what this energy's doing. So the idea is you're actually multitasking a number of different mission modalities, if you will. The primary one is to maintain the higher vibrational speed of my core, the monopole, right? So we don't collapse this place into a dark star, a death star, which is a death spiral, which is the decelerating speed of your core, right? You decelerate the speed of that core because something's sucking the amount of energy out of everything that's here. If you can't maintain the higher vibration and keep more living light, which is real light, going through all the operating systems, what do you think happens? The entire bioplasma field that's running through everyone's circuits, which represents all the software operating systems that are inside here, will simply peter out. There went all the light. Somebody turned the lights out inside this planet ship. Right? So somebody's got to keep the lights on. So you have the difference between artificial light and real living light that goes on forever, gifting electrons. So now you're back into the real electrical department, if you will, or the light department, right? That has to come in and fix this stuff. So as I used to say when I was a child coming in, I work for the power company of the multiverse. Okay, so in other words, when the shit hits the fan in the all creation, then who do you want to send in? I'm not a tech operator. I'm a monopole polarity integrator. So the idea is to recover. Okay, or if you will, like what I mentioned the other day, is when you realize you want to come back for your children. Now we get back into hating your parents, the black flowering stuff, the victimizer software, and that becomes a two-edged sword. Okay, because I know what that feels like. Because all I have to do is look at what happened with my own son. I haven't seen my son since he's 3 years of age. Okay, so I realize that my son doesn't know what's going on. Let's put it this way. He's never heard my side of the story on how it can be explained in the way that I've unfolded everything that I've experienced, what it's like to experience being on a spiritual battlefield, how much of that my son has become aware of, to translate that by realizing what actually happened as a result of who his mother is and who I am. Because I've mentioned this before. When I married her, which was in 1977, I believe it was in July, before I actually went up and put a ring on her finger and said, I do, I was already aware of the fact, like having a looking glass, like I'm already experiencing the future as above, so below, that knows that this marriage is only going to last 7 years. And I knew that before I put that ring on her finger. And guess what happened? Later on, after her and I separated, it was 7 years. How do you know? How to figure that out? Right? Inside the movie, outside the movie. When you're an eternal being, it's sort of easy to know these things, right? And the reason that is because they're running in a simulator at a slower rate of speed. So when you're running at a higher rate of speed, it means you're seeing things that are playing in the past as they're happening in the past, because they're not experiencing anything new that hasn't already happened. So now you're back to the frame rate speed of being an eternal being and something that's running on a time clock. Because the difference in speed is significant. It's called a time delay or time dependent, which means it takes time to record everything that's happening simultaneously within simulations and make a copy of it. And then the next thing is experienced. So now we're back to memory and no memory, which is based on speed. That's a speed ratio harmonic, which is really how much fire you got. Right? Which is another measurement of how much light you're experiencing. So if you're experiencing eternal light within your own heart and soul, you're lit on fire, right? So that allows you to burn off anything that's fake, that isn't real, or if you will, artificial light codes, because those codes do not represent what love is. So anything that doesn't represent what love is against the law. So when you're running on eternal fire, which is the law, you're burning off something that isn't. And that's a measurement of learning, actually. How fast we're learning. So you know that when your mother and father are joined as one, and you come out of them as a soul, as a starseed, and you're experiencing the purity of the love because it's eternal, because you're experiencing it in you as a child, then you're experiencing the love that both your mother and your father have for you as a child. Now you know your parents. Right? Now we're back into the black flowering stuff, right? So I realized, because for many years that wound was very deep. It's like a big scab with my son, right? Same as it would be my clan mother, Karen Ann McDonald, right? What happened to her children, okay? And why these things happen just like Chris Nadeau. I've mentioned him in the past. He's an AB positive bloodline. I've met a number of different AB positive bloodline Arcturians that all have different stories, who have all experienced what they experience in different ways. But what I was surprised at, probably more than anything else, is what they're experiencing at different times that I become aware of it. That's telling me they're having some challenges, is what I call it. Okay, because I know, because of my own road trip that I took, there were people that wrote me off and said, he's not going to recover. He's not going to recover his energy, his fragments. He's not going to be able to recover them. He's gone. Just forget about him. He's going to self-destruct. That's basically what it is. It's called self-destruct programming. It's an API interface with an AI to self-destruct, which means to siphon off your soul and your spirit's gone. It's fell. Can't maintain its speed. Running this. Okay, so it took me 10 years to recover me as a result of everything that I experienced here, and the amount of trauma that I was quantifying or I was experiencing, because I mentioned before some of my stories, my experiences, like when I was 9 years old, that means I feel what you feel. So try and quantify that across every operating system that is here inside of a planet chip. So I was measuring the density on a planetary level as a monopole, right? So it works a little differently for me, because that's an enormous amount of trauma, because I don't measure that trauma by what I feel by just humans on the planet. It's everything that's in cellular living energy form. Okay? So that's microcosmic stuff and macrocosmic level stuff. When you're cosmic level antenna, it means we feel everything. Right? Yeah. So that means that's an enormous amount of burn off. And it took me the better part. It went in stages, in incremental stages. It took me the better part of 2 years just to be able to get centered again. Let alone to recovering more and more fragments, recovering more and more of what I lost, recovering more and more. It's like pulling all your dolls in. You're pulling all your energy back in. But when you're a monopole, you already realize you're infinite. So that's an infinite amount of energy that you have available that is represented by infinite creative imagination. So you're back to the simplicity of it, which is wherever love is, we are in living spirit. So you realize you're an eternal being, because the spirit, which is what love is, which is what the light is, that is in all that light, is the spirit that is integrated with my oversoul, which is being a monopole that allows me to pull all the fragments in, so that everybody that is able to recover the fragments, in other words, I'm trying to recover all the fragments of everything that's ever been lost since the end of day one in the multiverse, since the end of day one. Okay, so that I go back to what I knew as a child, that I'm not supposed to experience a loss of light in me as a result of experiencing the loss of light or a fragment in anything else that exists within the entire multiverse. Wow, we're talking about going back to time wave zero, when all of creation began. Yes. So that nothing that we ever experience after that is ever going to be anything less than what the law of one is, which means everything in creation is experiencing what I am, which is what love is. It goes on forever, because that's what the law is. Ask Mama. Ask Mama Earth. Ask Eve. We all know this. Love is the law. And why it's love is the law? Because the math doesn't lie. Yeah, you think? So I try and keep a neutral perspective, which is n equals 0, right? No time. Because of all the trauma that everybody experienced here, right? So it's just like, this is what I know, this is what I experienced, and this is the way that it is, see? But I realize as a 4-year-old that I'm not held captive by that. Okay? Which means the ultimate decider of what you choose, of your own free will, of what you want to experience, and I've known this since I was a child, I'm not held captive by the information that's being presented by another being, no matter who they are. Because I don't perceive the universe in terms of belief systems. Okay? It's what I feel through my heart and soul that I know to be true, and I know what's true is eternal unconditional love. And that allows me to be able to create whatever I want and to experience whatever I choose to experience by virtue of having the permission to do that, because you're an eternal being running on eternal unconditional love. So wherever I am, love is. So that means I can create something new out of whole cloth that's never existed before, which means it turns everything upside down, which means whatever was before, I can change it. Okay. In other words, this all the information, like for instance, that others say, well, this is the calendar and this is the time and this is how everything was being connected, right? And you realize that all of that is represented by what the past is because it's held in memory. Otherwise, they wouldn't be aware of what's held in memory that they now present now in a future way. So they're operating on everything that was existing, what they remember that was held in the past. As if there isn't another new way to create a different world, a different star system that is different from the one that was held in memory. You see how that works? So when you're an eternal being, you're not held captive by the past, because there isn't any time. There isn't any memory. Okay? Memory is only required when you're running in a simulator for record-keeping purposes. And the reason is quite simple. You're moving too fast. When you're running on eternal fire, nothing gets recorded. Okay? That's no memory. That's no batteries required. And what's his name? Nassim Haramein? He got it. He figured it out. Wow. Yeah. He knows. That's called knowing. He knows. He knows the truth. That's right. This is why when you're running on the purest of light, particularly all the light that's coming in here now, we're exposing all of it. There's not one shred, not one detail left that isn't going to get exposed for what it is and what it isn't. And I know what's true. Eternal love is what's true. And that means you're free to create and thus experience whatever you want. You're free to go. We don't hold energy captive. Whatever you want to experience, go experience it. That's the beauty and that's the eternal gift and the eternal blessing. That when you experience that much love in your heart and in your soul, which is an eternal gift, it's an eternal blessing. And when you experience that through your own heart and soul, then if you are able to experience it the way that I have, is one of the reasons it sets us on fire to keep gifting it away, so that you can actually experience just how powerful creation actually is when you're running on eternal unconditional love, as the energy and the source from which it's all made manifest into the creation, which means you're not limited. You're unlimited, which means there's no boundaries. There are no boundaries of what's possible to experience because you're on fire. I call that a gift from heaven or a match made in heaven because I'm matched. Okay? Like matchsticks. You know, the soulful member of the old stick matches? Yeah. I used to play around with those. But anyway, have a beautiful day. Be good to yourselves. I love you all. That's my 3 cents for the day.